Hey everybody, how's it going? We're going to be looking at Reconstruction for this lecture series. It's a really important time period that we'll be looking at. They're all very important, of course. But this one is real important for understanding a few things about American history. One, first and foremost, it's going to tell us a lot about race relations. And not just black and white race relations. Mainly what we're looking at when we talk about race relations in American history is we're looking at the concept of white supremacy and the problem of white supremacy and understanding it fundamentally as a white problem. And Reconstruction really addresses that predicament of what was Reconstruction and how did that poison the ideals of the United States. It's been it is the fundamental contradiction of U.S. history, that we are a country with a creed based on freedom, liberty, and justice for all, threaded with this assumption that white people are biologically superior. It's something that has plagued U.S. history for quite a long time. Reconstruction, the Reconstruction period, is from 1863 to 1877. And the essay prompt is discuss the two constitutional theories that evolved around the questions of Reconstruction. Also, describe the three phases of Reconstruction. Finally, describe the promise and hope of Reconstruction and its eventual demise. And in doing this, you're going to be looking at, I believe, about 5 different learning objectives, this being the first one. Let me get the three phases out of the way first. The three phases are as follows. 1, presidential Reconstruction, which lasts roughly from 1863 to about 1867. And then you have the next phase is congressional Reconstruction, which lasts from 1867, 1868, all the way up to about 1875. And then Reconstruction begins to dissolve into what's called redemption, the third phase of Reconstruction, where we get the Great Compromise of 1877. So just have that kind of that chronological framework in mind, that there's these 3 phases, and they're pretty self-explanatory. At first you have the president who believes he's in charge of Reconstruction, which is, again, let me back up a little bit. Reconstruction is reconstructing the South, both and the nation as a whole, both physically, just from the effects of war, and socially and politically, economically as well. Mainly what we'll be focusing on is the social and political aspects of it, of Reconstruction, and the attempt to reconstruct. Congressional Reconstruction, self-explanatory. Congress believes it has the authority to reconstruct the nation, and they would take measures to do so. And then that breaks down, and we get back into something called redemption, and we'll talk more about that later. So let's move into learning objective number 1. All right. So learning objective number 1, and again, this will encompass about a paragraph, maybe 2 paragraphs, 5 to 8 sentences apiece. And feel free too to bring in any of Howard Zinn's observations in relation to this learning objective. Okay, so discuss the 2 constitutional theories that evolved around the question of Reconstruction. And again, this is phase 1, presidential. All right, so there's 2 questions that 2 constitutional questions, theories that evolve around Reconstruction. And they centered around 2 points. Were the seceded states in or out of the Union when the rebellion was crushed? Right. And the second question is who would control Reconstruction? So let's look at the first question, basically, of Reconstruction, the theory of Reconstruction. Were the states that seceded in or out of the Union when the rebellion was crushed, when the Civil War was over, in other words? So from the northern premise, that secession was illegal, or I should be more specific, from presidential, Lincoln's perspective, and Johnson's perspective. The secession was illegal. So strict logic if it was illegal, strict logic would conclude that the former states of the Confederate States of America had always been and were never out of the Union, right? So this question is easily resolved as far as the president is concerned. It was illegal, so therefore it was impossible for them to secede. So both President Lincoln and Johnson supported this view, obviously, and that would manifest in different ways. They saw the states as indestructible, and they were never out of the Union, for the simple reason that they couldn't be. This theory, though rigorously opposed by the radical leadership, mainly under the direction of this stern-looking fellow right here, Thaddeus Stevens. He represents basically this notion of radical republicanism, which would be the leadership of congressional Reconstruction later, so they're going to butt heads completely. A radical what differentiated a radical Republican from a normal Republican was that fundamentally that blacks had inalienable rights, and those needed to be honored within the dynamics of Reconstruction, and we'll talk more about that later. So, this theory of this theory that the presidential Reconstruction that the states had never seceded from the Union was obviously opposed by radical leaders, radical Republican leaders. It would receive judicial support in the Supreme Court case Texas versus White of 1869, when Chief Justice Chase, speaking for the majority, stated, "The Constitution in all its provisions looks to an indestructible union composed of indestructible states, considered therefore as transactions under the Constitution, the ordinance of secession, and all the acts of her legislature intended to give effect to that ordinance were absolutely null. They were utterly without operation in law." He's speaking basically of the secession. "The obligation of the state as a member of the Union remained perfect and unimpaired. It certainly follows that the state did not cease to be a state, nor her citizens to be citizens of the Union. If this were otherwise, the states must have become foreign, and all her citizens foreigners. The war must have ceased to be a war for the suppression of rebellion, and must have become a war for conquest and subjugation. Our conclusion, therefore, is that Texas continued to be a state, and a state of the Union." So argued Chase, and this would just affirm presidential notions of that the states had never seceded from the Union. So the flip side of it is, if on the contrary secession was valid, the South might consistently be treated as, well, a conquered territory without any legal rights that the Union was required to respect. So this would be the opinion of the radical Republicans, that the South made a decision to leave the Union and therefore deserved the treatment of being conquered territory and conquered citizens. Upon what theory, then, could Reconstruction proceed? If the states were still in the Union, it was only the citizens who were out of their normal relations with the federal government. And these could be restored through the pardoning power of the president. So this would be the position of both Lincoln and Johnson throughout presidential Reconstruction. So this leads us to the second question: who should control the Reconstruction process, the president or Congress? And that's what we'll be looking at in the next learning objective. So see you there. Do let me know if you have any questions or concerns dealing with this learning objective. Otherwise, carry on. You should be able to write a solid paragraph just basically defining the two constitutional theories. One, were the states in or out of the Union, and basically looking at what the presidents, what both Johnson and Lincoln, the presidents, thought of this, and Congress's view, especially under radical Republicans. They're obviously going to view that they were out of the Union and should be treated as conquered citizens. So I'll see you in